אני חושב שקצרה היריעה מלספר, או קצר הסרטון מלספר יותר נכון, על אודות פיט פילסינגר. מי שלא מכיר אותו, למעשה אז הוא כתב וערך שני ספרים שמאוד מאוד מרכזיים בתחום ריצות המרתון, ובכלל בתחום הריצות, Advancing Marathoning ו-Road Racing for the Serious Runner. שני ספרים שהוא ערך. כמו כן הבן אדם הוא בעצם המנהל המקצועי של האקדמיה לספורט בניו זילנד, כיום הוא מתגורר בניו זילנד. היה פעמיים חבר נבחרת ארצות הברית במרתון, הוא ניצח ב-84 אפילו את אלברטו סלזר בלוס אנג'לס. כמו כן נשיא שישו זה 2:11. פיט בחור מאוד מאוד נחמד, מאוד חביב, תמיד עוזר לי כאן שאני צריך, הוא בא ומתעניין ושואל אם אני צריך משהו, איך האימונים שלי מתקדמים, אם משהו בסדר, אם הכל בסדר. לפעמים הוא גם מלווה אותי על אופניים שהוא רוכב לידי, או שהוא בא לצפות באימוני אצטדיון שאני עושה, מיוזמתו, אני אפילו לא מבקש כאלה דברים. כששאלתי אותו אם הוא רוצה להשתתף באיזשהו רעיון קצר, שנוכל לספר קצת על הבן אדם ועל קצת האופי המחשיבה שלו, הוא נהיות להסכים בכלל בלי היסוס. ומה שאתם הולכים לראות בכמה דקות הקרובות זה מסיר רעיון שערכתי איתו לפני כמה ימים. הרעיון הוא ככה היה די ספונטני האמת היא, ופיט נהיות להסכים כפי שאמרתי בשמחה. גם עכשיו אחרי רעיון אנחנו מחליפים עדיין חוות דעת וכל מיני דברים בנושא הזה. זהו, אז בואו ניתן לכם לצפות ברעיון. יש לכם איזושהי שאלות או משהו שאני יכול להעביר אליו, אז בכיף, אין לי שום בעיה לעשות זאת. זהו, קדימה.
We are curious primarily about your advice as coach, but before we even start, you came in as the first American in 2 Olympian Games. You beat likes of Alberto Salazar, Bill Rogers, Great Meyer, Tony Sandoval, and other greats. What does it feel like when all the endless and redundant training come together and you win a big race?
Yeah, well, it feels wonderful. Yeah, obviously. I think the key thing is that you plan for a long time, right? So you've got this marathon and you've trained for it for 5 or 6 months. Before that, you've developed a plan. And so when it all comes together and works, it really feels wonderful. You don't always get it right, but I was lucky to get it right at least for 2 Olympic trials.
Okay. Do you still run today?
I'm not running like I would like. Last year here at Font-Romeu, I got carried away running in the mountains and I've damaged my big toe joint, and so it hurts to run. So I'm just deciding now whether I need surgery or not.
Okay. Can you please share with us your views of the state of elite long distance running from a global perspective? You were one of the best runners world during the 80s, at a time when African and European could actually compete for medals in global events. But over the past 2 decades, we've seen complete African domination, with time like 2:05 become almost standard over the past 2 years, and with the rest of the world being left behind. You also live in and work in New Zealand, a country that had produced Olympian champion in the past. Do you see American and Europeans and Kiwis bridge the gap?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And you raise New Zealanders, I would talk about the Finns as well. So back in the 60s and 70s, the New Zealanders and the Finns, 2 small countries, were the best in the world in distance running. And what did they do? They had people doing a lot of aerobic training. They were doing more aerobic training than anybody else, and so they were the best in the world. I think the advantage that the Kenyans and the Ethiopians have is they have lots of young people starting to train at a young age. They don't even know they're training. Lots of times they're just going back and forth to school. You always read about the Kenyan who lives 12 kilometers from the school. I think they do that on purpose. I think they always build the schools far away from the towns. And so these kids, they're going back and forth every day and getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So by the time they're 20 years old, they're much better than the European or the American or the New Zealand or Australian runner who started maybe at 14 or 15 and just does a bit of training. So that's what I think the secret is. It's about long-term development, many, many miles.
So you don't think it's something in the genes or something like this?
If there's a genetic component, I'd say the genetic is that much and the hard work is that much.
Oh. What do you think are the keys to that happening in the European or something like this?
It's really about getting training groups together. So actually the U.S. has a bit of a resurgence now in distance running, and that's because they have about 5 or 6 groups where there are good runners who are training together. Working together, I think, is very important.
Okay. From reading your books, it seems that you present a balanced approach to training in terms of mixing both quality and quantity. In Israel, probably like any other place where people are running, the debate of focusing on quantity vs quality, specific by amateur runners, tend to come up. What do you think? What do you see as the key to attaining a correct balance? And were you influenced more by the linear approach or the Martin Howell one?
Yeah. So I think for the marathon, the linear approach is the better approach. And of course, I live in New Zealand, right? And so when you arrive at the airport in New Zealand from wherever you've come overseas, the first question they say is, do you believe in the linear approach? And if you don't, they either shoot you or they make you leave the country. So of course I believe in linear. But seriously, I think for the marathon, it's an aerobic event, right? It's not that fast, even when you're running 2:03. It's only moderately fast, but it's all about endurance. The linear approach is all about endurance, all about that development. I think for the shorter distances, that Martin Coe-Horwell approach is more appropriate.
Okay. What you describe as the 3 most important keys to your success as a runner, and how would you translate those keys to success of aspiring amateur marathoners? Is there really a difference?
Sure. So for me, the 3 things. One was being a student of the event. I tried to learn everything I could. From the top coaches, from reading books, from talking to other runners, and that was very important, talking to the top runners and finding out what they did. Second thing would be training with others. So I moved from where I lived in Rochester, New York, to Boston, about 450 kilometers, because that's where there were many good marathoners. And I got training with Bill Rogers and Randy Thomas and Greg Meyer and these guys. And what I found after a while was they weren't that special. What they did very well was they got up every morning and they trained hard. That's all they did. They didn't do anything that special. They weren't that special. Wonderful guys, but no different from everybody else. So that's the second thing. The third thing was getting international competition. So it was very useful for me to get to a very high level of competition and also to get out of the United States and to be in other countries and to race and to find out that, well, actually, to make the U.S. Olympic team, while it was still a very big goal, it wasn't nearly as scary when you were starting to see, boy, there were very good runners from many other countries as well. So for the average runner, I think that the first 2, be a student of the sport, train with a group. When you can, train with people who are a little bit better than you. And then I guess the third one, rather than international competition, it's just getting into races where there are people who are better and that you can aspire to achieve.
Okay. In hindsight, do you see any new lesson or training innovations that have been introduced in the past 25 years that you will have wanted to go back and implement in your own training?
Yeah, rather than innovations per se, some of it's just common sense. Back in the 70s and 80s, we still had the hardman marathon approach, where the more and the harder you train, the better. And that works really well when things are going well. But when things aren't going well, say you're sick or you're injured, it goes really badly, because then the harder you push, the longer the sickness or the injury lasts. So I think if I could go back, I would just balance the hard work and the recovery better. And if I found a little bit of an injury or I was getting sick, I would just pull back much more quickly. The other thing now is I think that there are better recovery methods and better nutrition advice as well. So people are using cold after racing. I think that's very useful. I think compression tights are very useful. And in terms of diet, all we really knew was eat a lot of carbohydrates and stay hydrated. But now it's much more sophisticated. And during races, very few of us actually took in any carbohydrate. We only took in water. And I think our performances would have been better if we had been taking in carbohydrate during the race.